If you'd told me that the visitation with my son, an event that happened only every other weekend, would be extended indefinitely, I would have jumped with joy. In the end, I wish the circumstances under which they unfolded had never happened. The clouds were sightless. In the clear sky, the day Jasmine dropped off my boy. A perfect day to play a little catch in the yard or go fishing at the nearby stock pond. Cyrus bounced out of the car and ran joyously toward me, unaware that his old man was a perpetual fuck-up that had broken up the family in the first place. Oh well. It was a happy day. The birds sang their old nostalgic tunes of a lost summer in my own childhood. It was warm, not too warm, and the neighborhood was buzzing with excitement as the spring showers had come to a close. It was as close as it could get to perfect. The evening light danced against the treetops, turning a violet hue as dusk began to settle in. Burnt orange water reflected the dying sun as it continued sinking away to nothing. We grabbed our tackle box, the giant beige one my uncle gifted me before he was stolen by cancer, and filled it with the empty, crumpled-up bits of plastic that once held bologna sandwiches. As I said, it was a perfect day, very reminiscent of my own childhood. We'd thrown the fat bluegill back that we had caught. I hadn't felt like messing with cleaning and cooking them. Instead, dinner would likely be mac and cheese with some cut-up hot dogs, a staple in my household, whether or not Cyrus was visiting. Hopefully I hadn't run through Oscar Mayer supply. Home never felt so lonely. The walls never seemed so barren of old family pictures when Cyrus wasn't around. Sometimes he only added to the pain. I would never tell him that, though. Even with the faucet turned all the way up, the water dribbled out and made boiling pasta a very patient game. Cyrus was babbling about some game he was playing on my phone. He's just a kid, I thought, and pretended to be interested in whatever the hell he was talking about. The sun had vanished and the moon was especially bright that night, having slid nearly halfway to its crescendo before dinner was finally done. Cyrus had stolen my phone to the living room, staring at the bright characters absent-mindedly as a nondescript Netflix show played in the background. "Hey, here, buddy, sorry about the wait." I set the bowl of neon yellow stuff in front of him. The pink scramble of hot dog jutting out made me feel a little ashamed. I plopped down next to him and flipped through the various titles on Netflix, most of which I had already seen a couple of times. Cyrus tossed the phone aside and picked at the mess of food in the bowl. I can't remember if he took a bite or not. "Dad!" I jumped, reeling from the doze I had fallen in. If Jasmine was here, it would have been such a perfect day. Such a perfect day. Instead, this is where it all fell apart. He massaged furiously at his temples, his knees pulled tight against his heaving chest. "What's the matter? Are you okay?" I jumped from the couch and got on one knee, putting my hands around his shoulders. I watched helplessly as Cyrus twisted and contorted his body, trying to run away from whatever pain was in his head. Suddenly, he fell still. I studied him for a while, nearly on the verge of tears as his body had become totally limp. And then, a noise. At first it was quiet, then it grew and grew until it filled the room with totality. It's hard to describe that noise, almost like a wind turbine if you were up close to it. From behind the couch, just above my son's head, it peeked at me. Its thick, black fingers ended at sharp, nailless points. Just as I met its eyes, it slithered behind the couch, and that's when Cyrus awoke in a screaming fit. I jumped awake again, Cyrus sitting next to me as pale as a sheet. His eyes were bulging, glued to the blank TV ahead. I couldn't help but check behind the couch to make sure it wasn't still there. Then, to my son, who was still staring at the nothing on the television. His mouth was hanging open, just enough to allow the continuous stream of drool to fall out. I ran to the kitchen to grab a paper towel and clean the odd amount of drool from his chin. There wasn't a thermometer in the house, but I didn't take a rocket science to tell that he was burning up. A fever, I thought. I carried the boy to his bedroom, feeling as though I was being watched the entire way, and tucked him into bed. A doctor's visit would soon be on the horizon. I returned to the couch in the living room, careful to keep my gaze fixed on the TV and nothing else. Truthfully, I was too afraid to look in the shadowy corners. That night was filled with nightmares. The next day, I rang Jasmine, letting her know that Sai was sick and needed to go to the doctor. Ordinarily, this wouldn't have been an issue, but Jazz was immunocompromised. She'd been diagnosed with breast cancer a few months before we divorced, and my son would be staying with me for the foreseeable future. I couldn't complain. I didn't get to see him nearly enough as it was. That day was very much the opposite of the previous. The sky was gloomy and spits of rain fell consistently from dawn to nightfall. The doctor had said that Cyrus had a particularly severe ear infection, but nothing that some antibiotics couldn't fix. He sent us home with a tube of the stuff, my wallet noticeably lighter. Apply some of this twice a day, once in the morning and once before bedtime, the older gentleman had said. He squeezed my shoulder and smiled, though there seemed to be something else behind his wary eyes. He stopped me again as I turned to leave. Sir, he started, though he seemed to study his words carefully. Your son kept mentioning something he called the Flumes. I shrugged. The only time I had heard that word was in reference to a ravine on the edge of town where we'd all smoked pot in high school. Nothing struck me as odd about it at the time. They come from the Flumes, those noises, he kept saying. The doctor pushed closer, his eyes growing wild. I stepped backward, tugging at Sai's hand as we left the building wordlessly. Aside from my busy mind, the car road home was utterly silent. I could hear my boy's heavy, labored breaths all the way from the back seat. Inner ear infection, my ass, I thought. After laying Cyrus back down for bed, I fixed him a bowl of instant chicken and noodles and decided to give Jasmine a call. The phone rang endlessly before the robotic voice indicated that the caller wasn't available. I tried once more, but gave up after it rang a few more times, probably sleeping. I returned to the couch, deciding to rewatch Nightmare on Elm Street for the 4th or 5th time. After a while, I decided to put on cable, growing tired of the listless titles on Netflix. I was never too interested in the local news, but today seemed as good as any to catch up on the town's happenings. The Grantfield Gators girls softball team had advanced to sectionals, and one of the townsfolk were celebrating their 100th birthday. A breaking news graphic slid below the frazzled news lady on the television. Wherever she was, it sure looked familiar. Wild dog shits on mayor's front yard. I laughed at my own stupid joke and surely turned as white as Cyrus had the previous night as the lady on the TV continued. A local woman was found tied to a tree and disemboweled at the scene. Police are saying various symbols were branded all over the woman's body, and the material used to bind her to the elm tree was of unusual property. She continued on for a while, but I hadn't noticed. The air had fallen heavy, and that familiar warbling had filled the room again. Heavy footsteps slammed up the staircase at an otherworldly pace, up the staircase and towards my son's room. I ran. I swear I ran as fast as I could, but I knew. When I got to his room, he was gone, the curtains blowing aimlessly in the wind as the window had been slammed open so hard that the glass had shattered in the panes. The bowl of chicken and noodles sat on the bedside table, untouched. I tried calling Jasmine again and again and again. Still no answer. I wanted to write this to whoever may be reading, so that you know where to look if I don't return. I know where my son is. I know where Jasmine is. The Flumes took them, or whatever might be lurking in it.